Hello, and welcome to some Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango,
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
and today we're going to talk about League of Legends and good skill and bad skill. But before we do that, Buddy, why don't you tell the folks at home what we do on this podcast?
Well, it is remarkably simple because we just like to talk about games. But yeah, we're going to talk about good skill and bad skill. And, I feel like this is something that people don't think about all that much in a certain sense. And I feel like, anytime, let's say, good skill is introduced and bad skill is taken away, people really have a hard time reading, kind of one from the other. And it always just seems, as a jumping off point, that all skill, more skill, is good skill. I don't know, is that the perception that you have?
I think that's generally the case in a lot of cases. I think a lot of communities think that more good skill is bad skill. I think to lead it off, we should probably explain what kind of the genesis of this conversation is.
Fair enough.
And that's that it's not released yet, but in the leaked patch notes for the LoL 6.3 patch, they have right now Alistar has an interaction with his W and his Q. His W is a knockback and his Q is a knock up. And if you time it right, you can interrupt the knockback on the W with the knock up on the Q and get essentially what's been called a mini Malphite ult. Essentially you dash to them and knock them up, which is very useful from a crowd control capability. And if you screw it up, the guy just goes flying backwards and you kind of waste a cooldown on your Q. So this has a certain amount of mechanical execution component to it. And in the newest patch, they are changing it so that you can just buffer the Q, and it will essentially automatically go off, or it will automatically go off as expected when you attempt, so you don't have to have that much mechanical skill. Did I miss anything there?
No, that's basically it. Yeah, the Alistar thing is kind of famously a bug that turned into a feature. It was more or less discovered when a bunch of Korean players were playing at super high pings, and somehow their inputs of W's and Q's on Alistar created the combo, and people realized that you could do it as an initiation maneuver. Then it was kind of acknowledged by the devs at the time, and they basically said, yeah, it's a bug. We didn't intend it to be that way, but, it's something that separates the good Alistars from the great Alistars, would be the meme version of this, because that's what they always say about that kind of stuff. And I do think that the change itself is it's interesting because it really highlights a difference in league champion design and balance and stuff that has been running kind of throughout the past 2 years. It feels like wherein those kinds of interactions are decreased and more straightforward, more intuitive interactions are increased.
Yeah, they have been steadily eliminating this kind of need for specific timing to get certain combos off. And I at the very least, I think you can't say that it's anything but consistent. Even if you hold a poor opinion on the maneuver in general. This is definitely in line with what Riot's been doing for the past, like you said, two or so years. But I think that both you and I are both of the opinion that this is a good change because that kind of interaction is an example of bad skill, which I think to kind of broadly define it is kind of skill for skill's sake, unnecessary complication and execution barrier to make things essentially I would say more complicated than need be. Do you think that's fair?
I actually think that it kind of comes down to a intuition standpoint, where I feel as though intuitive combos, an intuitive skill that is discernible, and you can and makes, you know what I mean? That is where it's important. That's where it kind of comes into play, and the Alistar combo is very unintuitive from that perspective. I think, in the same way that like other champions are 100% part of this. Riven is all about animation canceling, for instance, and so it's a very unintuitive skill to know how to animation cancel in order to like get your empowered attacks off on Riven. But that's the way that you play. You know what I mean? Like that's the way that Riven is played, because a super high echelon of players figured out this animation canceling stuff, and she's been nerfed into the ground over and over and over and over again for the past 4 years. But it's the same kind of thing, right? Rengar we actually talked about this Rengar interaction before, and they patched it out since then.
Yeah.
Where when Rengar was mid jump, he could throw his bolas to guarantee a 0 cast time snare. And they patched that out, like he has a cast time now. Old Kha'Zix was this way, where you could cancel the cast time on the spikes by casting them while you are in the process of jumping. And honestly, that Kha'Zix one, people still want it back from Riot. You know what I mean? They still are asking it for it to come back.
Well, they've actually brought it back in kind of the same way that they're doing it for Alistar's combo, in that you can buffer one of his ult or the Void Spikes to cast instantly when he lands.
Yeah, but that's different because the advantage to it was casting the spikes without the cast time.
Yeah,
you still have the cast time. It's just and so I think removing these kinds of things from League are it's all just good design. And I also think that it's good design because I feel like high skilled champions in League of Legends need to be thoughtful rather than you know what I mean, like this is kind of like a half-formed thought in the first place, so I'm not really sure where.
Yeah,
but like in the sense of like
what you're saying, like because Azir is a very high-skilled champion, but the only thing you can even say that's like non-intuitive about him is the Shurima shuffle, and they actually patched that to make it easier to do.
Yeah,
and the Shurima shuffle
even the Shurima shuffle, which for the uninitiated is Azir has a move that pushes enemies back, and so if Azir gets behind you, you know what I mean, he can push you into the enemy into his own team as a way to kind of split teams up, but that makes a lot of sense.
Wait! I thought the shuffle was when you moved your soldier while you were dashing to it. I think
is that the Shurima? I thought that was his version of the insect kick.
Terminology aside, I was talking about
either one. These are both the same thing, and this makes a lot of sense for Azir because his whole thing is about positioning, right? The high skill cap to Azir comes out from positioning. In the same way that the high skill cap for Yasuo, comes out to minions allow you to dash at 425 units, but you can only dash to one minion every 6 seconds, and the cooldown is 0.1 seconds. You know what I mean? Like that. That's a hard thing for Yasuo players to master, right? Timing your ultimate to extend the full duration of a knockup is a hard thing for Yasuo players to master. Hitting your wind walls appropriate, you know what I mean? Like these are all, but they're all very intuitive things, right? I don't really think anybody goes up against Yasuo and dies and then goes, how on earth did that happen? Because it's incomprehensible. If they say how on earth did that happen because they're really mad that Yasuo is a balanced champion.
Yeah, I think I think your jabs aside,
he may or may not be my favorite champion. I neither confirm nor deny my own love for Yasuo.
as one of our favorite content creators said, there might be a family of baby men out there who cry every time they get ulted by Yasuo. But just to comment on that, I think that actually the thing you talked about, which is optimizing knockup time with Yasuo's ult, I think that's actually something that's very much on the edge of this kind of good skill, bad skill divide, because it requires, like, a bit of forethought that, while not necessarily bad, I think you could make a very strong case for, that kind of optimization is not something that you need to ask the player to do. It's not. It's more of a knowledge thing than it is a skillful thing, if that makes sense. See, because
I don't. I guess I just don't agree with that.
Okay, I think to kind of give this context, I'm going to give you my personal kind of hill to die on example of bad skill that I think is the absolute worst, and that is in Dota 2 and Dota 1. There is this item called the Blink Dagger, and the Blink Dagger lets you, in LoL terms, flash. It lets you blink a certain distance ahead. And in Dota 1, due to it was either a bug or like a limitation of the engine, if you, it had a blink range of, I think it was 600, the numbers are unimportant, but it had a blink range of, say, 600, and if you clicked greater than that 600 range, you would only blink 400 units. And this is, something, this is like a knowledge thing, and famously in Dota 2, they have preserved that behavior, which they didn't need to. They preserved that behavior because it is the behavior in Dota 1. And to me, that is the epitome of something that really doesn't matter. And getting that extra 200 range out of knowing what 600 units looks like is something that, to me at least, seems like completely unnecessary amount of burden of knowledge on the player.
Can you explain what that means? How does one?
So you know how
does it bring up a cast circle? But
it doesn't. There are no cast circles in there. There are no range indicators in Dota. So if you but that's a good example, right? Like if it were to bring up a cast circle.
I think I see it.
If you click outside of that
over
range,
600, it's going to go 400 units.
Yeah.
But if I click 599, it's going to go 599 units.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That makes sense. I understand now. Wow, that's so dumb. God, Dota 2 makes these terrible decisions.
They are decisions based around the community because the community has wanted everything to be exactly the same as Dota 1 for a long time because I don't know, that's the way it goes. But that's always kind of my go-to example of something that seems very, very stupid and narrow and short-sighted that aggravates me. And like I said, I don't think Yasuo's ult is that bad by any means, but I think that kind of optimization to hit the end of the the optimal knockup time, that kind of feels like something that's like, well, you could just make the ult behave so that when you hit the button, it jumps to or it starts the animation when the knockup's about to end, or some such. Again, not like I said, it skirts that kind of edge as to what's necessary and what's not in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I understand. I think it's clear enough, sort of from. I don't know. I don't really know how I feel about it. It always struck me as that kind of good skill thing, but I don't know if I'm just biased because.
Sure. I mean, do you want to make the case for it, right?
Skill. Well, the case for it is that it's discerning. Like you can see the difference, right? Because when you play, a lot of Yasuo, you get kind of like rhythms in your head almost. How long these not, it's the same with lots of champions that have CC, but it's a little bit tougher because Yasuo's CC is always the exact same amount of time no matter what level it is, right? But if I'm a level 1 Poppy and I stun you into a wall, that's a 1 second stun. If I'm a level 13 Poppy, I stun you into a wall, that's a 2 second stun. And it incrementally increases, right? So you don't have as much of you don't get the timings down as much as you do with someone like Yasuo, who his knockup is forever going to be 1 second, and the ultimate is forever going to be 1 second. And I think that they just they kind of get in your head, and you get the cadence of it. For instance, I also think it does some things like Yasuo's ult not having a cast time is really important to me, because I think that his ability to instantly, dash to someone in the middle of a team fight, right? Or to get out. This is what allows these sick hardcore Yasuo plays to happen. And like if there was a buffer that said, you have to wait until the knockup would otherwise expire. Or Yasuo hovers there for it. You know what I mean? Like, what happens if I click Yasuo ult on a Malphite ult? Does that mean Yasuo hovers in the air for 2.5 seconds? That's weird to me.
I think that makes sense. But I think that argument's more, I guess, in the line of that aspect of skill is a consequence of having the ability otherwise behave intuitively, rather than something that's... So what you're saying is then that timing isn't there for, like, it's not designed there for that skill's sake. It's a level of skill that you can add to it, which comes as a consequence of the ability needing to behave in this instantaneous fashion. Is that fair?
Yeah, that would be a good way to characterize it.
Okay, I think that's fair. I think I can agree with that.
The other thing I think, I think Yasuo is a very high skill cap champion for other reasons, but another instance of this might be someone like Zed. I don't think Zed's shadows and the speed of the shadow, like all of that stuff, is necessarily like the most intuitive. It's something that you learn. And so intuition probably, as I go back and correct 15 minutes ago, buddy, intuition probably is a poor way to think about it, right? Like, some of these are skills that you have to build up over time, right? Like, I have to build up over time my understanding of my shadows on Zed. I have to build up over time, my focus on catching axes as Draven. I have to build up over time, my positioning on Azir so that I'm constantly within range of my soldiers, but not in range to get just like absolutely marked by the rest of the team. And I think those are also really important expressions of high skill caps, especially in League of Legends, where high skill cap champions tend to be that thing.
Yeah. No, and I think that's very fair. And I think that's something that Riot's talked a lot about, is especially with the latest kind of round. I don't know if you saw, but they released a blog post on their design values for new champions. It's like,
I did see that.
And an emphasis on kind of having a variety of skill levels in champions. That way, people who are not as mechanically skilled can still effectively participate. Is what I'm going to say. Is what I'm going to call it.
Be honest,
I don't mean that sound patronizing.
Yeah, well, I don't necessarily disagree to a certain extent. Having all of the champions over the last 2 years be higher than the average skill cap, except for one who I had a hard time. I would have to look at the list again to be like.
It's Braum.
Oh yeah, that would make sense. Yeah, Braum makes sense. But even so, I kind of do think that a lot of the if I was Riot, I would be reworking a lot of these older champions down in skill level, which I think has kind of happened. I think New Poppy is pretty straightforward. She's not the toughest champion in the world. Ryze is the usual clusterfuck. I hope they do rework him again, because I really hate Ryze in his current iteration.
Oh really? What do you hate about Ryze?
I think they're literally doing exactly what we are kind of talking about, where they're trying to maintain this weird fantasy that Ryze got because people were. So this story time. Original Ryze gets reduction on his remaining cooldowns every time he casts a spell, right? So when you're playing Ryze, you get into these kinds of machine gunning rotations of, it used to be Q, W, Q, E, Q, R, Q, W, Q, E, Q, right? You could do that full combo, and each second you would have a new spell to cast. And you could root somebody place. I really enjoyed this kind of Ryze. But the thing is that was Ryze built as a mage, and cooldown reduction and mana became so good on him that you got to 40% CDR, and you were just machine gunning super, super hard, and it was really obtrusive. And so he got nerfed and changed and nerfed and buffed and changed, and they've changed him twice since then. And I just think that this interaction that they have, either his abilities It doesn't make sense for the context of his abilities, for the context of his ultimate and his snare. Just like it just doesn't make sense in the current iteration of Rise. It's too difficult. It's too hard. And this is a 450 IP champion that you play in the tutorial. So like that just seems so strange to me that they keep reworking him to try and be this that machine gun mage that we saw 2 years ago, when that is kind of opposite his price point, and it's opposite what his status in the tutorial.
Okay, but so let's say that, like, do you think there's a problem with that fantasy? Like, he's 450 RP or IP rather, because even if they did significant work on him, increasing the IP, I think, is kind of like something that they never want to do. I don't think they ever want to increase the IP of a champion. And so you think the right choice is just kind of abandon ship on that concept for Rise and put Rise into some simpler position, and then release like Rise's brother to fulfill that fantasy at full price?
Yeah, and I think that would be the right call. I also think it's the right call, and this is very Rise-specific stuff. I also think it's the right call for Rise because he has a couple of just bad interactions in general, because he scales off of mana and CDR so well. Mana and CDR items are tank items, and so Rise gets a lot of mileage out of Frozen Heart, for instance, which makes him unduly tanky as a mage. And eventually he was balanced around this. But I think that machine gun mage is cool. You know what I mean? I think it should just be, it should be something more like Lux, a traditional actual mage, rather than Garen.
Okay. So I see what you're saying. Is that what you want? Essentially, you want to split the like get scalings off of mana and the machine gun mage concept into two separate heroes.
Yeah, I think get scalings off of mana is okay, to be honest. I think it's a great idea for a tank. Singed has a bunch of it. Honestly, I think like the perfect iteration of Singed has his poison scale off of his mana and his flip scale off of his mana as damage. Because I really like the idea of Singed being because his passive does it, and so I like that idea. And I kind of always hate like the how Singed wants you to build AP on him. I think that's just a weird thing. But these are all just kind of like my pie in the sky, like how I would redesign X champion. But yeah, I think Rise, that he needs those identities split apart. I mean, they made the machine gun mage. That's what Cassiopeia is, right. And I think she's a great version of it. She's also a very high skill cap champion because you have to. Managing cast times and kind of and hitting your ground-based skill shots on Cassiopeia is like her that's her skill, and so I don't know. Yeah, that's how I feel about things.
No, that's definitely fair. I don't remember what brought us onto this Rise specific.
Just that I was suggesting that newer champions, like champions that are coming out, should probably be higher they should be higher skill cap champions compared to older champions who are naturally cheaper, who should be lower. I can't really think of. I would have to look at the list of who's 1350, who's kind of whatever to really parse it out. But I do think that. I like that Ashe is an easy champion. She's like even like Sivir. Sivir got reworked, but she still stayed an easy champion. And I think that kind of stuff is good, overall, because those are the beginning champions. I also, to be honest, I think that they should release champions. They'll never do this, but if my hypothetical situation would say they would release champions keyed to an IP based on their skill level, right? I think Caitlyn should be a 450 IP champion too, but because she got released however long ago, she's 4800. And I like the idea of Blue Kong, the new easy top laner, coming out, and he just comes out at 450 IP because that's his IP level. I mean, that is completely unrelated. That's not a business thing. That's just like a game design thing. But
I think there's other issues there, which are things like if you kind of say like, well, this is supposed to be an easy champion at 450, you encourage people in games to be like, hey, you're playing an easy champion, get good, scrub. It takes no skill at all to play the 450 or IP champion.
I don't know that I agree with that though, because that to me that's that's somebody being a dick. You know what I mean? People
right,
can be
but
dicks
that's
for all the
obviously a
time.
problem in the community, right? Like you want to manage like there is a man named Jeffrey Lynn whose entire job is to try and avoid these issues, and again it's kind of tangential, but I think that those kind of perceptions are legitimate concerns. And while I see your point about tying it to IP as kind of like a signaling device, where it's kind of like a player-friendly way to indicate these things, I think also has the potential to cause toxicity in the community, which is
I don't think it
famously
causes
something
any
they're
more
trying
toxicity than somebody playing Jhin in ranked the week he comes out. You know what I mean? Or like, somebody playing Callista and failing at it. That person is, I mean, that the person who plays Callista and fails at it is way more likely to get flamed than the person who plays the easy new champion and succeeds on it. You know what I mean? Like I don't think that hypothetically that argument makes sense to me. It's just I don't think that's what I don't think that's what the community responds to.
No, but you're talking about more likely to. That's like the fact that one is more likely to cause toxicity than the other doesn't mean that we shouldn't be trying to reduce toxicity in all forms.
Yeah, but I think going at toxicity by the indirect means of good game design seems I don't like that. I think that's not good. You know what I mean?
Don't know.
Yeah,
I also don't know if I agree with you that like easy champions should all be priced at 450 IP. Like I don't think the champion, like there is a little description in if you go to the champion description, there's a little bar that tells you theoretically how difficult this champion is. This guy goes from like very small to very large. And I think that's a much better, like I don't think you need to tie the champion cost to the skill level that way.
You don't necessarily need to, but it makes onboarding way easier. Because it means that a new player who doesn't have any IP can get a bunch of champions and they're all right for his skill level.
Right, but that already exists, right? Like there's already 10 champions that exist that are theoretically at that point, right? Like I think most of the champions at the 450 level are already there. The 450, 1350 level are that kind of...
Yeah, sure, but I mean, I also think that when they release, Wukong is this go-to example.
Right.
But like when they release a new champion who is just a ridiculously easy champion, he should also kind of be on that level.
Right, but you really haven't justified why the price point needs to reflect that. What the price point has anything to do with the skill level of a champion?
Because more variety. Because even though there are already 10, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that having more variety down there for newer players is fine, right? And so in a world where that's business viable, in order to release champions at 450 rather than releasing champions at 7,800, I think that it's better to completely tie IP costs to difficulty costs or difficulty level, because the new player should focus on 450 champions before they focus on harder champions, right? And so releasing a low difficulty champion at the same price point at all of these high difficulty champions is just confusing and kind of muddling from that design goal.
I don't think I agree with you on that, but I don't think we're gonna be able to
I mean, it's really honestly a moot point, because this is. Yeah. I'm just talking about it in the context of if I'm talking as a game designer about the metagame with which things are priced, right? About the IPRP, earning that whole metagame. That's one of the changes I would make. Along with removing runes, because those are fucking stupid.
Yeah. I would remove runes. I think I'm fine with masteries being at the point that they're at. But I would. Oh, you don't like masteries?
I don't like their scaling. I don't like that they scale up. I think that's just. it's very clear that they looked at like kind of World of Warcraft when they made the masteries this way. But I kind of feel like
you think?
Yeah,
Given that's followed the exact same design path as World of Warcraft masteries.
Yeah, I'm just saying that I mean, World of Warcraft has designed out of it. You know what I mean? Like they have kind of sworn off that as well, and I think that League would do well to follow that path.
I think they're almost there. I think it's a matter of essentially taking out those middle matched or those keeping the big decision point ones like keeping the 1 point masters and getting rid of the 5 point masteries is I think
the 5 point masteries. Yeah, like the 5 point masteries don't bug me. What bugs me is that they're 5 points. They should be 1 point. You know what I mean? Like, you should get 1 mastery point every 5 levels, and they, you know what I mean? And they just, like, they pop all the way, like, I don't think anybody splits the difference on these masteries where you go 2 of one and 3 of another. It's not transferable. It's not like I can take my points in, the Magic Pen one at the very, like, it just should be 1 mastery apiece. For all of these things, and we shouldn't have to. But I don't know. I mean, this is kind of off topic at this point.
Yeah, I think that's. I think I was gonna say you don't think. I think some people do split, but I think that's also another level of bad skill, right? Like knowing, having to have 37 room pages so that you have the maybe freaking I don't know. Janna has 2 points in one and 3 points in the other, and 1 point in one and 4 points in another, because that's optimal for her. I think that kind of knowledge is another example of bad skill, needing to tune everything, because ultimately that's also something that's burden of knowledge more than it is skill, I guess.
I honestly think that what they should do with masteries is boil them out. So for season 3, I want to say. For Season 3, they upped the move speed on literally every champion in the game, and they changed how boots work a little bit, because basically everybody was going boots first item during Season 2, because you just needed the moves, you needed the move speed of level 1 boots in order to dodge, skill shots and everything like that. And so the change that they made to compensate was they changed around the Doran's items, and they upped everybody's move speed so that the crucial early game move speed of boots wasn't as crucial. And I think that is a good example of what they could do with runes. I think that, you know what I mean? You should just bake in the 17 AD that most people run as their AD carry runes onto an AD carry. You should just bake in, the armor runes onto basically everyone, because they're the best yellows. And I think I don't know. I think the metagame is valuable. It's not like this is an entire win-win, but I think the better version of the game has them bake out runes entirely.
Yeah, I mean, you can call me a shitter as much as you want, but I know I have many friends that have a variety of room pages, and I kind of famously have 2. They have flat armor yellows and scaling MR blues and move speed quints, and then attack damage or AP reds. And compared to my friends who I know have a lot of those room pages don't make them better than me, essentially. And I think that's kind of another level of obfuscation there.
Well, that's kind of the thing, is that the rune metagame lets you go into games with quote unquote suboptimal rune pages, which is not great. And I think it's kind of it's almost a noob trap to a certain extent. People who go into matches as with mages with an AD page because they don't have AP runes yet. That kind of, it just sucks.
Yeah, or even from the other side of that coin, somebody who goes into a match with a mage with 80 runes because they took the wrong rune page by accident,
Oh
right?
yeah,
Like, you kind of
it's
ruined
not
that
even
20 minutes of game.
100%. It's the same the same principle.
Yeah. But to kind of get back on topic, something I did want to hit on with this kind of good skill, bad skill thing is something that's near and dear to my heart, which is fighting games. Which is an example of a genre with a lot of different skill points, a lot of different knowledge points that are in many ways more arcane and harder to understand than your typical MOBA. But I would argue that those are examples of good skill, like that, like those kind of like the kind of interactions with, say, different footsies and how different moves have different priority over one another is kind of a fundamental part of that game, and it's good there. It's good there, even with.
I don't know that I agree with that.
All right, let's hear.
Mostly
your opinion.
because, well, I don't know Street Fighter, and I know that's kind of the place you're coming from. I think a lot of the bullshit that happens in Super Smash Melee, wave dashing and stuff like that is kind of
sure.
bullshit.
I think part of the issue. Well, so I will say that it is my opinion, the opinion of many people who are much more learned and wiser than me about this, is that Melee has actually the highest execution barrier of any fighting game out there. And I think part of the problem there is not that things like Wave Dash exist, it's that things that Wave Dash were discovered, and Melee was kind of like the game at the end of the era where you could adjust like that. Like, the game was not designed around those kinds of things. In fact, it was pretty explicitly designed to not have that kind of technicality to it. And it was also at a point in time where something like releasing an internet update is a thing that didn't happen at that point in time.
Yeah.
And so the game is not balanced around those interactions because it was never intended to be, and they couldn't patch them out later, which I think I understand your point of frustration. I know there's a lot of people out there who love Melee and love its tactical complexity. I think part of the thing there that makes it okay for a lot of people and kind of makes fighting games okay and kind of like this level of skill okay in a larger sense is this kind of weird interaction where that having a tiered champion pool, or not champion pool, listen to me, talking in LoL terms, having a tiered fighter list is okay because you don't have this kind of natural problem where you can't have two people, like you can have two people playing the same fighter in a fighting game, and so those if you end up with a tiered champion pool, assuming that there is not some sort of far and away much better fighter than any of the rest of them, it lets you it lets you kind of express that skill in a way that if there is some kind of inherent advantage, you can still play around that, if that makes sense.
Well, I think the tiered fighter pool is a lot like the difficulty tiered pool in League of Legends, in the sense that I might be really great at Street Fighter and you might suck, or vice versa, probably. But I can load into the match, pick E Honda, and bear hug you to death because E Honda is really fucking easy. You know what I mean? Like, I think you have to. I think you have to level that playing field to a certain extent, because otherwise the game is.
See, I don't think you get this disparate. Like E Honda isn't particularly easy, or like, not even to pick on your particular example. Like, I don't think you have this disparity in skill in fighters that you have in MOBAs. Like, I don't think there's an equivalent of a Wukong in Street Fighter.
Man, I don't agree with that. I 100% think, wow, yeah, I 100% think that there's a huge disparity between high-level players and low-level players.
Oh, there's definitely a disparity between high-level players and low-level players. There's no disparity. Like, you don't have the same type of disparity in character, right? Like, there is no Wukong equivalent in Street Fighter, right? Like, there's no easy champion, or not easy champion, easy fighter to pick who just doesn't have execution limits. Everybody has, like, the same type of execution limits, whether it's with like, and some have harder, say, links and combos than others, but there's no, like, there's no person that can throw a fireball by using like two buttons instead of a quarter circle.
Well, yeah, I'm not necessarily saying I think League is a tough place to talk about it to a certain extent. Because I think champions like Taric don't lend themselves to this discussion all that well. Taric is a low skill ceiling, low skill floor champion, but I think the Wukong example, like a platinum player on Wukong is still, he's still better than a level 1 player.
Oh, sure.
On Wukong,
I just all I
it's
meant
just
to
that
say,
Wukong is easier than Yasuo.
Sure.
Right.
All I meant to say there is that fighting games don't you talk about this importance of having a variety of skill level in Champions League, and I agree with you on that. But I think almost every fighter in Street Fighter and in most fighting games has a similar skill floor and skill ceiling. You don't get that kind of variety in fighting games in terms of skill. It just doesn't happen.
I guess I don't know Street Fighter well enough.
Yeah,
but I do know other fighting games, and I think it's important in other fighting games. I think that there's a good reason that we could all play. A bunch of middling people can play Smash together, and someone can pick Link because The Legend of Zelda is his favorite, and still do okay compared to the guy who's really technical on Fox. You know what I mean?
See, I think though I think that's difference in execute. I don't think I just don't see those kinds of specifically disparity in champion difficult. I'm using champion, because all kind of fighting game characters are built out of kind of their game specific set of moves. I don't think Link's a less technical champion than Fox. And vice versa. I think that's kind of if you're a middling player, you have about the same level of skill, and you can't there's no kind of trap to fall into that you have with League of Legends, right? There's no, you can't accidentally pick Azir type of deal. I think that's a fundamental difference in the genres. Fighting games are built with the assumption that every character is going to have similar skill ceiling and similar skill floor. And MOBAs are not, because you have a much greater variety of ability, and not to pick on you, but I think this is a more of a kind of knowledge based thing. I'm obviously
but I mean, so in a fighting game that I know a lot about, in Soul Calibur 2. That exists. You know what I mean?
Okay, sure.
Easy players pick up Talim and they can wreck because, first of all, Talim's broken, but second of all, she's a very straightforward person, right? You can pick up Raphael and do his vertical combo, the 1-2-3 hit, and it just does a lot of damage and it's very straightforward. Or you can be, dude, players who play Necrid was the weirdest. Just the weirdest guy to play, but Necrid players were really freaking good. Players who played champion, now I'm doing it. Unintuitive fighters like Cervantes. Kilik will be way easier for anybody to pick up compared to Cervantes. Compared to Ivy, Ivy's probably the best example of this because of how ridiculously convoluted some of her moves are. But a really good Ivy player is, someone who can make the most of that. And so maybe I'm speaking from my own bias by
you're absolutely right.
Soul Calibur, but
no, you're absolutely right. And there are the more that I think about it, the more I'm actually off base here, right? I think Street Fighter and Smash, in particular, just because those games came up, are games where the characters are at about all the same level. But I think you're right. Games like Soul Calibur, I think arena fighters in general, and then games, anime games like BlazBlue and Guilty Gear also have that kind of difference in skill in skill level and or in ease of use, I guess. Where the things you need to know. But I think I'll stand by my statement that Street Fighter and Smash are built to be that all the fighters are around the same level of skill ceiling and skill floor.
I think that's better for... I think that League specifically designs against that philosophy,
sure.
Which is why...
absolutely.
For instance, I would say that the disparity in League is bigger than the disparity in any of these other fighting games. But I do think that it's there. You know what I mean? No matter... I think... the perfectly designed game would have low skill floors, high skill ceilings on everybody. But that's kind of an unrealistic goal. You know what I mean? Like it's just
Yeah.
so you can't. There's it's just impossible to do that on a roster of 25 different guys. I don't know. Maybe but you know what I mean. Maybe like the perfectly designed fighting game has yet to come out. But
Yeah.
I don't think there's really any. I don't think there's any fighting game. There's any game that can kind of claim.
Oh yeah, nothing's
That.
that perfect. Absolutely, especially since we're just as funny as it is because we talk about league patches, day to day. We're really still at the especially for fighting games. We're really at the beginning of the dawn of the live balance kind of era, right? Like for a very long time, games were as balanced as they were on release, and that was it. And maybe you got like Street Fighter 3 got second impact and third strike, and they had some balance changes with them, but third strike is the same game it was on release and will always be the same game it was on release because you can't one the technology wasn't there, and two that's kind of how it was.
Yeah, I don't think this
that's
is.
just the era it was in.
I don't think this is unique to fighting games.
Oh,
because it's natural
not.
to consoles, right? The fact that all of these games are on. Everyone knows that the pistol in Halo 1 is OP, because it's the same principle.
Yeah,
it's because they're console games instead of like hardcore PC games. Patches are much more common.
Honestly, I think that. So, I think even console games were getting it earlier than fighting games are, and I think it's actually because it's the death of arcades, because arcades machines are ones that are never hooked up to the internet.
Yeah, that's fair.
But that's default, getting into the minutia of arcade culture, which I think is
it's one of those things we could see. I would want to have like a full podcast on that, but I just don't know enough about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't think I do
too
either.
Young,
Yeah, especially in America. I think we're both the same age, but we were both too young to really get into the arcade culture. And we were all, funnily enough, we also grew up in the same area.
That's true. Well, even when I lived in Japan, it was the arcade culture was you went to a place. It's kind of like an internet cafe. You went to a place and it had a bunch of fucking TVs with a bunch of, and we incidentally played Soul Calibur 1, and we sat down at these TVs and played Soul Calibur 1 with their, at the time it was a Dreamcast. And that was our version of an arcade. There were regular arcade games, but nobody ever wanted to go over there and actually play the cabinets. We just wanted to play on the couches.
But yeah, like we're to kind of wax reminiscent. We're just not the right generation to talk about the death of arcade culture. Those are people like 5 to 10 years older than us.
Yeah, that's probably true. Also, I think arcades are just shitty in general. I'll say it. I don't give a fuck.
Oof.
Because
I think bold words from Buddy
because
Sola.
I think the like the coins, that interaction is just terrible. It's just built to rip you off. And to be honest, I kind of think it's kind of like it's kind of related to like Nintendo hard, like that thing. You know what I mean? I think of these as being two fundamentally bad things, right? That came out of the business at the time demanded certain things of game design that were not optimal game design.
I'll go toe to toe with you on the goodness of Nintendo hard.
Of course you will.
But this is not coming from like. I think there's a place for super hard games. I think that there's a reason why like super difficult platformers have their niche, like the Super Meat Boys of the world and the Money Seizes of the world, that have like this again, to call it Nintendo hard kind of difficulty to it. And you're right, in some places it's not appropriate, and definitely in the cases of arcade games, it's an attempt to eat your money.
For arcade games, it's an attempt to eat your money, and for console games, it's an attempt to increase longevity, right? I want my game to be played for 20 hours instead of 10, so I'm going to make it really hard to beat so that you keep failing over and over and over again, right? I think that is straight up what it is as far as I'm concerned. I just think that's fucking terrible.
I think
and it's
that's
one of the
part
reasons
of it,
that
but
we, I think to talk about skill in the context of like single player games and like games as art, I actually think that hard games from like an art standpoint are just like stupid. Like you should have control over that.
And oh wow! So I think like I don't know. That's I don't know how I feel. I feel like that statement strikes me as extremely wrong. Like there are like I can't imagine a world where like for certain genres like platformers you can't make that, you can't dial down the difficulty of a platformer using like there's no dial to adjust there. Like it's like the level is as hard as the level is designed, and I would be extremely aggravated if there were no super hard platformers out there, because I love that genre. I love that kind of
super hard platformers can exist, right? It's just that you should be able to control easy, medium, hard, super hard. You know what I mean? Like that should be for every single player game. That should be a part of it. Because as far as I'm concerned, skill like that kind of skill for a single player game is just built to it's an aesthetic decision, right? There's really nothing more to it, and so
but you can't just that dial on a platform, because that's all
you can
that's
adjust
all in the level
number
design.
of mushrooms that spawn on Mario. You can adjust the number of Goombas there are on Mario. You can adjust all of that kind of stuff.
Right, but no. That's a fundamental change in level design. You levels in platformers are not so elastic that you can just turn those dials. Like adding 7 more Goombas to the level doesn't make it harder. It just makes it a different level. Like that's that's a fundamental misunderstanding of how platformers work.
I don't think that those things. I think that players having extra lives in platformers is a fix. I'm not a hardcore platform game designer. I'm just saying out there somewhere there is someone who is, and someone who should think about it and be able to implement a system like that. Because super hard games, from a games as art perspective, it's just an aesthetic thing, as far as I'm concerned. I don't see anything else besides that.
I mean, I don't know. I also don't know how you talk about platform. I don't know how you talk about platformers as games as art, because it's like everything in a platformer is in its level design. Like it is the epitome of a level design game. Or what platformers are, and that's all in there. And you can't make the game the only way to make the game easier is to have like a set of easier levels, and say, well, if you don't want anything harder than that, then you don't play the other set of levels. I mean, maybe to kind of get into this, if we want to go back to our favorite topic of ludonarrative dissonance, I think that this is actually part of the problem with Braid. I feel that Braid, which has received many accolades, is nothing special, and I think that's because that the most interesting parts, like Braid has some interesting platforming and some interesting story, but those two things exist in two completely different universes from one another. Like, there is nothing in the game, in the platforming of Braid that influences the story of that game. And I think that's because platforming games fundamentally don't have, it's all about their levels. I mean, they don't really have, the story is by its nature going to be told in between pieces, or as like kind of background dressing on a set of jumps, in kind of like in Thomas Was Alone type fashion.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think platformers have in general been pretty shitty from that perspective, compared to lots of other games that have adopted the more, the other stuff that I think makes this all work better.
I just don't.
I think there's something good to like. I think that there's probably a good platformer out there with like a good story and like whatever, but Most of them are just an excuse to platform, which to me is what is that even?
That's it. I mean, it's a game,
That's a
right?
guy.
Like,
That's a guy washing his pink car with us. He's waxing it for 45 minutes. That kind of bullshit. It's.
I mean, but it's the satisfaction of mastery, right? Like that's the point.
Yeah,
right?
that's empty. First of all, I can get that with other games. Second of all, that is a completely empty, fleeting feeling. It is tied to. It is meaningless catharsis. You know what I mean? Like
I disagree entirely with that. The sense of accomplishment you can get from beating a super tough game is as fleeting as any catharsis I got from playing Mass Effect 2. Like I feel more accomplished for having beat Money Seas than I felt for beating Mass Effect 2.
Yeah, but a narrative thing is always going to fall in and out of people's tastes, right? Like, that's to be expected. I was particularly moved by Mass Effect 2, and I'm particularly moved by plenty of other games, from here to Timbuktu, right? But
sure.
there are definitely narrative games that I play that don't hit me, they don't hit me square in that spot in the same way.
So my point is less that, there is a victory to be had from beating something that's difficult that you can't get from just a pure story perspective. Like it's maybe it's back. Maybe it's a single player version of games as sport.
It's not a pure story perspective. It's both, right? Mass Effect 2 has to be difficult, right? In order for you to, because it's an aesthetic. This is what I mean by it's an aesthetics thing. It has to be difficult because the mission that you're on is difficult, right? Like you preparing yourself to go on this crazy difficult suicide mission, and that being hard and that being a challenge for you is a mirror to that being hard and that being a challenge for Shepard, right? That's the aesthetic part of this. You know what I mean? That's the.
I don't think that's true because Mass Effect 2 isn't hard. That's not a hard game.
It can be hard. Have you played it on Insane? Have you played it on even if you just play it on hard? Right? Mass Effect 2 and most BioWare games are a great example of this. I just recently rebeat Mass Effect 2 for like the 4th time on Insane, and the only way that you can do that, not the only way, but the very best, the most efficient path, right, is you have to rely on your squad members in order to combo your powers together, right? You need to pick someone up with pull in order to CC them, and then knock them back with concussive shot in order to slam into the wall for tons of damage. Or, you need to use Incinerate because Incinerate's the only thing that burns through this guy's armor, and then you need to use Disruptor ammo because that's the only thing that gets through his shield.
Sure.
Right? And that, first of all, that stuff reinforces the rest of the narrative of the game, which is you need to gather a team and work together with your team in order to save the fucking galaxy, right? And it also makes the game that much harder. It makes the game that much more difficult. I mean, Dragon Age 2 is like the epitome of this.
But wait. I want to stop you for a second because doesn't this go explicitly against what you just said, which is you should be able to dial like the difficulty on a game, that you need to be able to spin those wheels because ultimately the single player experience is about experiencing the game.
Yeah, maybe but I don't want to put somebody who just walks into Mass Effect 2 on Insane and have them run their head into the wall 40 fucking times and then put it down, right? Some people are naturally, I played plenty of third-person cover-based shooter RPGs, so Mass Effect 3 being played on Insane is not that big a thing, right? But when my girlfriend who doesn't play these kinds of games or whatever, she finds normal the same amount of challenging that I find insane. And so she needs to be able to, you know what I mean? That's why it should be a choice. And where you can scale it up and scale it down as per your needs or tastes or whatever. I think there's zero shame in, playing to your skill level. And second of all, I think that's just important for these games when it comes to like games as art. It's skill level is just a narrative, or not a narrative. It is an aesthetic thing.
Can you define that for me? Because I you keep saying
it's something you use in order to texture the game in a different way, right? other aesthetic things. An easy aesthetic thing for like games is like game. People call it game feel, but I like kinesthetics better. It is the sense of the controller in your hand, right? Games with really like first person shooters that feel better in your hands. I'm thinking from like on console, right?
Sure.
Destiny, the fact that these guys made all of these Halo games meant that when Destiny comes out, they had it calibrated.
Yes, it feels
that just
amazing.
Feels good. You know what I mean? It feels good to hit a headshot, right? And it looks good. And those are all aesthetic things that are built to elicit that response in you, right? That it feels good to do these things. But there are also things that are like you can have aesthetics in the other direction, right? Like Far Cry 2 had ridiculously imprecise weapons that would like break on you all the time, but that was because aesthetically that game was about the kind of chaos. I mean, that game was just about chaos in general. And so the idea that you could fire a rocket launcher and it spins off radically in some direction, you know what I mean? Like, that's all part of the game, and part of the experience of being in war-torn Africa where you can't, recognize friend from foe. I don't know. That's how I feel about that stuff.
I mean, I don't know. I just kind of take great offense to what you said maybe it was like 15 minutes ago at this point, when you said that like beating up hard platformer is an empty experience. I think that's just kind of like a gross misrepresentation of what that genre is about, which is about like mechanical mastery of a particular set of movements and a particular set of levels, and you have there's a great feeling of accomplishment when you beat those levels.
So I think that this qualifies the more games as sport to me than it does games as that's a very sport thing. I think that winning a game of League of Legends, that's a real experience, and working together with my team, that's a real experience, right? And it's the same principle, right? But I don't think of that as art. That's not art. You know what I mean? Like,
I'm about to say please define art, which I know is like, like, oh man, because like I just can't, like, maybe not can't, but like I don't know. I have trouble understanding your perspective on that particular notion. I guess.
I mean, art, I think, is about profundity. You know what I mean? And it's about, like, the dictionary definition here is going to talk about aesthetic beauty.
You want to read off the dictionary?
No, I mean, that's literally, I'm sure I'm about to look it up and I'm about to be wrong. But I'm sure it has something to do with aesthetic beauty, right?
So Google Card says, the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination, typically in a visual form such as a painting or sculpture, producing works to be appreciated primarily for their beauty or emotional power.
And that's exactly what it is, right? I think that but like, to me, the important thing is kind of that, like, profundity, right? Where it's really satisfying to beat. I'm trying to. I guess I just don't play like any of these kinds of games. Is that how this
shakes out?
Well, you know what I mean? Like, man, see, because some of these are kind of, half and half. You know what I mean? Kind of like how dancing is like dance is like half sport, but also half art. It's like, it's the same kind of thing, with something like Civilization. You know what I mean? Like, beating a game of Civilization, like, that's a profound feeling, but I also think Civilization is kind of like almost the poster child of, like, we might call that emergent gameplay, of, like, emergent storytelling, because whoever has played Civilization before, right, they can tell me the story of what happened to their civilization, right, like where it goes from beginning to end, and that's that story, and the emotions that are elicited at that story, right, crucially beating this siege back, or what, you know what I mean, like, those are real emotions. That's art, right? It's in the same way that it's, Well, whatever. That's emotion. That's art in the same way that it is like in Mass Effect 2 when you beat this highly tailored mission, right?
Sure, but so if you're allowed to project that kind of like feeling onto something that's unstructured like a civilization mission, why are you not allowed to project those types of emotions onto something like a match of League of Legends or beating a level in a platformer?
I think you can, but I don't think I just don't think that most platformers like fulfill that, because a part of that is this is also talking like good art, bad art kind of thing. Like platformers are built for their, like these kinds of platformers you're talking about are built from the sport down to the art. And so that half of it doesn't necessarily come through, right? Are you really feeling accomplished because you rescued Peach from the castle, or because you hit the flag with the highest score? That's a question. And I think we can all agree that the story in Mario is just window dressing, basically, right? Like, it's not good. It's not a good story. And there are plenty of Civilization games that aren't good stories, right? But that's just kind of the nature of it when you give players a bunch of systems and say, have at it, rather than handpicking them Spec Ops The Line.
Sure.
By the way, the same thing is true in other emerging games like Minecraft, right? That's just a bunch of systems. And you just have to kind of fill in the blanks. But the blanks that you fill in, likely or not, will probably end up as a story.
This is another time when I wish we had a camera, that way the viewers at home could see me squinting at the imaginary camera and being like, do I buy this?
I don't. This is part of the thing where all games have narratives by necessity, right? Like League of Legends has that too, and it's more there in League than it is in Rocket League, for instance, because at least in League you're playing a character, you know what I mean? And so there's at least kind of like narrative dressing on top of your sport salad.
Well, obviously you haven't done any of the things where you jump outside the map and explore the civilization that was clearly built around Rocket League as a sport and the fall of that civilization.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I haven't done that for Rocket League.
I mean, even if that is really the case, that's metagame information. So I guess that's another. I think that's another episode at some point. Is like, at what point does is the story part of the game? Is the story part of hinted exterior things type of deal? Maybe it's not an episode, maybe it's just a couple minutes, but
I think when we talk about games as sport, skill is really important, because that's what sport is, right?
Absolutely. It's
competitive, and it's a measure of that stuff. Even single player stuff, right? My skill at golf, that's still a sport, even though it's a single player sport, kind of fundamentally. And the time, you know what I mean? This is how speedrunners compete. And I think it's telling that, speedrunning games, like a lot of speedrunning games are these kinds of high execution platformers.
Okay, so
when we're talking about games as art, right? Like, I don't think skill factors into it any more than as an aesthetic decision.
Okay, so I've got a question for you then, because you brought up this point where which I might buy, which is essentially that games as games like that, the difficulty of Mass Effect 2 is intrinsic to the story of that game, because it's supposed to be a struggle for Shepard. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. I can.
I mean, that is literally 1-to-1 for lots of things, but yeah, in this example specifically. Yeah,
so what about a game where for the character it's supposed to be a kind of not so difficult task, but it's difficult for you as the player because that's the point of the game?
I can't think of an example. I think the other half of this is stuff
Go for
Well,
it.
like the quick time events in The Walking Dead only show up at super high tension moments, right? The rest of that game is low tension. It's not difficult. It's not difficult in a skill sense to choose which dialogue option to take. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure. Well, so let's maybe an example of this is something like this is like something like Devil's Tournament, or maybe more generically like a James Bond game, right? Like James Bond is supposed to do all of these missions with a cool head, and very what's projected as relative ease, for a lot of it. Like even when he's in danger, he's still kind of like a badass that doesn't seem to be too perturbed by what's happening around him. But the difficulty in a James Bond game can get very difficult to where you as the player are very hectic and frantic, even if the projected James Bond is not.
Yeah, but I mean that sounds to me like a criticism of that James Bond game. I mean, I don't really think licensed films games are all that great to begin with, right?
I mean, GoldenEye is considered one of the formative multiplayer games of our.
Yeah, but that multiplayer game is good as sport. Is it good as art? I don't think so. The single player in GoldenEye, I think, actually is pretty good in general. In GoldenEye, I do remember those. I remember those missions being pretty in line, because a lot of them were kind of stealthy, and a lot of them were a lot about. The difficulty in the GoldenEye games was built around optional objectives, right? Like you had to, in order to get like the 00 agent rating for each mission you undertook, you had to do more and more difficult tasks or whatever. So there's that part of it.
Sure, but that's my point, right? Like. They're difficult things for you as the player, but they're not supposed to be difficult things for James Bond, the character.
Even difficult things... Okay, so even difficult things for me, the player, are difficult things to do, and I still do them. Marcus Phoenix is an indomitable badass, but it's still hard for him to, beat whoever he has.
Sure, no. But Marcus Phoenix is Marcus Phoenix is supposed to be having a tough time, right? Like they're like in this kind
I
of
think
like
James Bond is also supposed to be having a tough time. I don't think he's walking down the park. He's having an easier time than I would have.
Sure, that's part of the narrative of that character. That like he's a badass that's kind of great at the things that he does.
Yeah, and he still does all of those like crazy missions. James Bond is probably a better expression of some of these first-person shooter heroes than anybody else is. But I don't think it's supposed to be... okay, here's the bottom line. If it is supposed to be that easy, then that's poor game design on the James Bond part, right? This specific subset of that game is not used to its fullest because it's not used to aesthetically match and further the timbre of this experience.
So you think that like then there's rather a game where the character is of the nature where the things that he is doing is not supposed to be difficult for him, or like he's supposed to be a super badass. And you're just the character is kind of disconnected from the skill of the game. Those games are always bad, and that
the games can
or
still
rather
be good
that the art of that game is always bad. Or
even the art of that game can be good. It's just imperfect, right? Even the art of those games can be good, even though the design doesn't the design of the difficulty system specifically doesn't support it. There are bad movies there are good movies with bad cinematography, right? There are good movies with bad editing, good movies with bad dialogue. You know what I mean? This is just a subset of the overall experience. And yeah, sure, maybe the difficulty level isn't as finely tuned as it should be to create the appropriate experience. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's
so my gut is telling me that this is wrong, and and just to kind of clue you in as to why I feel that that's the case. Is my gut tells me that's wrong because that means that every great game has to be a game where the hero is struggling. There's no room for a different character in
I don't think that's necessarily. I don't think that's necessarily.
Or rather, every game, like the only way to avoid that flaw that you're talking about is to have a game where the hero is struggling, essentially.
Yeah, but that's just the nature of all stories ever. You can't have any. You know what I mean?
You can.
There are every story is about overcoming difficulties, ever. Like, and some of those difficulties are, fucking Saving Private Ryan. Oh God, we're 8 men against the entire SS battalion. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's that difficulty. Sometimes it's the difficulty of, we're a bunch of frat guys and we want to bang chicks. Like those are still overcoming obstacles in order to get there.
Sure, I mean, but like there's it isn't like to you're a little bit more into it into the comics than I am, but aren't the crux of a lot of Batman comics kind of like this aha moment where like the justice plan comes out and it's not really like the everything's been planned out already, right? Like the struggle isn't in the even when the cards are down, right? The struggle isn't in the moment, right? Like because it's just as planned as happened. Explain your laughter, cackling buddy.
That is so. I think that's mostly a meme. What you're describing okay. Is the meme that like Batman. So okay, this is really what's going on in the comics. Batman beats everybody. Why? Because he's the most popular character. It's the same reason why in Marvel, Spider-Man beats everybody. Spider-Man goes toe-to-toe with the Hulk, and he wins because, he's the most popular character.
Max Landis actually has a nice video on this that came out recently. I don't know if you've seen it.
I haven't, but I'm sure...
It is essentially, who would win... whoever you fucking want to, because these characters don't really exist.
And that's exactly
who would
what
win,
it is,
Dr.
right?
Octopus versus Oliver Twist? Probably Oliver Twist.
Because Batman is the most popular character, right? But he's so fundamentally powerless in comparison to Superman that the only way that like ridiculously hyper rational continuity obsessed nerds can like reconcile the cognitive dissonance that you're explaining is this kind of trope that quote unquote Batman is always prepared, right? And he's and he thinks like so much faster than everybody else, and that's why he can always beat whoever he has to beat. But yeah, I mean every story ever, Batman is you know what I mean? Like Batman is still overcoming obstacles in order to get there. And in game design terms, those obstacles are represented by difficulty level, right? And that's just true. And part of this is also about where the POV character is. For instance, Sherlock Holmes mysteries are not hard for Sherlock Holmes himself to figure out, right? But that's why Sherlock Holmes mysteries are told from the perspective of Dr. Watson,
yeah.
Right? If you told the perspective from Sherlock Holmes, he would have figured it out in the first 2 fucking seconds, right? And that's not interesting. That's not a story, right? And so there's a reason that we focus on Watson instead of focusing on Sherlock Holmes. If there was ever a really good, Sherlock Holmes game that had, great difficulty assigned to it, part of that would be decoupling the character from the inner workings of Sherlock Holmes's mind, right? And I think that you could 100% do that. You could 100% do that and still have Sherlock Holmes be the controlled character, because there are
it'd be like a puzzle game of
exactly.
Some sort.
It would be a puzzle game of some sort, but you're trying to figure out what your own character already knows. I think it's doable. Yeah, that is how I feel. That is how I feel about
sure. So, but
game design from an artistic standpoint.
I think that's actually a good example to kind of like examine a little bit closer, right? Like, so like this theoretical Sherlock Holmes game where your character it's easy, like Sherlock Holmes, the seat that you are driving, knows more than the player does, like. So you're saying that like because the difficulty is all on the player, then that's an imperfect system that ideally, the character would be struggling as much as the player is.
Well, not necessarily. Sherlock Holmes is still overcoming obstacles. He just sees them coming
Okay, so
you know what I mean?
okay, so
but the thing is, the other thing is, I think you could, the one that pops into my head is I like a Sherlock Holmes game that's kind of like L.A. Noire, but instead of going up to every clue and like turning it over in your hands, like, I wonder what this means. He's like turning over these post-its. He's like, why the fuck am I looking at these post-its? Right? Like, I think that would actually be really funny, and that would be an interesting way to kind of play out because we are very used to being our POV characters in these kinds of things. But yeah, I mean, the kind of the perfect Sherlock Holmes game would probably be you playing as Watson, following Sherlock Holmes around and trying to figure it out. Or Sherlock Holmes tells you to go somewhere and you have to figure out why did he tell me to go? You know what I mean? Like, I think that would be probably the perfect perspective.
I feel like, like that theoretical game, it would feel like shit because at the end of the day, you're just figuring out what the hero has already figured out. You're just do
you feel like shit when you read Sherlock Holmes stories?
No, but that's because I'm not playing. I'm not playing Sherlock Holmes, the book. I'm reading it, right? Like I'm like the perspective is fundamentally different there. I'm not holding the book in my hands and like shaking it in an attempt to solve the mystery. Right, like that. Like I'm reading the story of somebody else solving the mystery. But
the Sherlock Holmes thing is still built around you getting all of the information that Sherlock did, and it's a race against time if you can put it together before he reveals it all in the third act. Right? That's the core. That's just the core, cycle that comes with a Sherlock Holmes thing. And so it's the same thing in gameplay terms.
That's not true though, right? A lot of Sherlock Holmes' revelations are not described, but like a lot of reading Sherlock Holmes is not trying to guess it before Sherlock Holmes does, because a lot of the details that Sherlock Holmes relies on to solve the case are not revealed by Watson because Watson doesn't think to note them down, right? Like Watson doesn't notice like the fact that the young man's clothes are pressed, which indicates that he is married.
Well, fair enough. I also agree with that, but I also think Sherlock Holmes is partially a procedural from that standpoint.
Right, but I think that's the fundamental. Like, if we were to play this, your theoretical perfect Sherlock Holmes games where you're playing as Watson, it's like there's no stakes because Watson's just for his own amusement trying to figure out what's happening before Sherlock actually solves the case.
I don't know. I don't see why that doesn't.
Because in that game world, your actions don't matter. In that, if Watson doesn't figure it out in time, Sherlock still has, and there's no consequence, right? Like from a story perspective, right? Like even if you have a timer that runs out and says you lose because you didn't figure it out in time, you as a character don't feel bad because that just means that Sherlock solved it before you figured it out.
Yeah, but there are other ways to make that work, which there are other reasons why Sherlock Holmes works, right? Like the modern Sherlock, the Benedict Cumberbatch Martin Freeman one works because first of all it's kind of half procedural, but it's also about their friendship, right? It's also about the emotional stakes of them being friends. That's what another modern interpretation of Sherlock Holmes would be House, right? But the big defining thing in House are all of these questions about morality and all of these things with the interplay between the three young doctors.
Sure, but
you can build stakes in other places. It doesn't necessarily have to.
Sure, but does that translate well into a game? I just don't. I am having trouble and I suspect that you can't create this theoretical game you're talking about where as a game this succeeds. Like I can see this succeeding as a television show or as a novel, but I think the nature of the medium makes it not work as a game.
Well, so that might be true. And here's why. Because the reason that you can play these kinds of games with Sherlock Holmes and stuff is because you can decouple your protagonist from your POV character.
Sure.
And that's a very, very tough thing to do in games because generally... So, this is part of... This, loops back into everything else. The player is also the protagonist, right? And so, if you, the player... are playing Watson, the specifically not the supporting character, because you need the Watson POV in order to make the Sherlock Holmes, who you do not play and you do not control, work, right? That's tougher. But I don't think it's impossible. I think that you could do that. And I think that I'm sure that an example of this does exist somewhere. I just haven't necessarily thought of it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Actually, a good one might be, well, see, that doesn't even work, too. Well, an okay one is Soap from, Call of Duty Modern Warfare, because the entire time you're following that super badass captain who's telling you what to do the whole time, right? And that game kind of doesn't count because it's not like the super badass captain is the protagonist or whatever.
Sure, but you still have to, there's still, the success of the mission still that still depends on the execution of your character, right? Like if he fails to do things, then there's still bad stuff that happens.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a good example, but that's the principle at play: is how coupled the point of view is to the protagonist in games when it's not that coupled, that harshly coupled in other media.
Okay, I just to kind of to close out and summarize my point. I just find it hard to believe that effectively that whenever you play a character that is like a masterful character, you're going to have a flawed game essentially. In some way.
that's not what it is. Well, I mean, some of these things are
either you're flawed because even a masterful character
still has obstacles to overcome.
Sure, he has. He's up, but the difficulty of you're either gonna fail because, or not fail, but be imperfect because either you're going to imperfectly represent that character's struggle, or your struggle is not going to match the character's struggle. There's some sort of, or you just can't play that character. There's some sort of disconnect there that has to happen by the rules that you've set up.
I don't think that's what Mary Sue is. A masterful character who doesn't have to struggle with anything is a Mary Sue. Character has to struggle. They have to have flaws. That's what makes them. That's what makes compelling protagonists compelling. And that's why their stories are always about overcoming obstacles.
So a Mary Sue is an example of a character that doesn't have to. So there's a character that goes through an emotional struggle that doesn't again, I'm going to bring up Devil's Third, which I'm sure you haven't played because no one's played that game. And I watched a Let's Play of it, but the character is that character's struggle is in the emotional aspects. For the most part, he is supposed to have to be he's to give you context, he's essentially a super agent. He's next KGB type, and dispatching enemy soldiers is not supposed to be difficult for him. The obstacle that he surmounts is this kind of emotional. These emotional obstacles he encounters as he goes toe to toe with the members of the team he was part of.
Okay, so through this example, I think we'll hit it. I think the answer there is to tune the difficulty down, because the difficulty being tough makes sense for Shepard when his thing is tough, right? The difficulty for this guy should be easy. He should walk through this game. It should be a cakewalk, right? And the hard parts of that game should be, hypothetically, the hard parts of games like The Walking Dead, where I agonize about the dialogue choices I'm making, not about how many times I fail at whatever. You know what I mean? This is what difficulty, the concept, is an aesthetic choice. And that includes easy shit, right? And if you want to make your shit easy to reinvent, that character wants his shit, his shooting guys to be easy, because that reinforces the character of this is easy for him.
So
do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's funny because I'm just imagining a very easy shooter, but when he comes to an emotional point, you've got this very difficult quick time event when you're mashing the X button to like be as like emotionally invested as possible.
Well, I mean, this is what I think of as why those like Walking Dead games are really good. I think all these because they invest in the pathos of these characters, so that's where you can you can twist the knife. I think the BioWare games do a good job of this too. By the way, like
sure. So I think what you're kind of getting at is that like the canonical version of this game is the one with the difficulty set on easy, and then like if you want to come back and play that game on hard for like sport reasons, that's its own thing. But like the perfect version of the art of this game is where the gun combat's easy.
Yeah. And that also kind of applies to these platformers. I don't think the platformer, you know what I mean? Like when I say these platformers aren't very good art or whatever, that does make them good skill. You know what I mean? I think those games as skill games, as the games as sport games, they're doing great. You know, they're nailing it, right?
Sure.
They're not super art games. That's not what they're there for, and that's fine. You know, I don't think that's a huge deal.
Okay.
But anyway, so now that we've spent the 45 minutes
talking about not
I'm actually really glad though, because I really liked that. I really like explaining these kinds of things because I think about games and really.
Yeah, I mean, we both, that's why we make the podcast.
That's why we make the podcast. But yeah, I guess we're good to go.
Yeah. I don't
know if this. What?
Well, I was going to say, what did you want to say?
I was going to say that that we are starting Hell's Rebels this week, but then I was like, well, we might not have the podcast out by that point, so.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, let's assume it gets done in a timely fashion.
It'll also be done next week. It'll just next Wednesday we will be playing Hell's Rebels. Yeah. Whether or not that's the 10th is kind of up in the air.
Yeah. But yeah, in case you thought you missed it, we didn't play last week because I was not in the same time zone as anybody else, so you didn't miss any Rise of the Rune Lords. Iron Gods is over. Hell's Rebels is starting up. And maybe at some point Shadowrun will start up. We'll have more details
in the not too distant future.
And was there anything else you wanted to mention? Are you going to be streaming XCOM on the channel anytime soon?
Oh man, I totally should. Probably when I do this other talking about games as skill and difficulty level. I probably, if I do this second campaign that I was talking to you about earlier in the cast, then probably.
Okay.
I will stream that version of it.
And as a tease, I think we're planning on, when it comes out, doing a stream of the of a co-op version of Total Warhammer, right?
Yeah, I 100%, like I million% want to do that.
Okay.
Because I want that game so bad.
No, that'll be great. What do you know? What race you're thinking of playing, or?
Probably human.
Okay, and I was thinking of dwarf, so that would make for a great co-op campaign.
Good. Yeah. I plan on playing as Emperor Karl Franz first.
Okay. Yeah, so we've got that to look forward to. So you can email us if you think that one of us is crazy or both of us are crazy or none of us are crazy at somederpsplaygame@gmail.com. That's somederpsplaygame@gmail.com. You can watch us at twitch.tv/somederpsplaygames. There will be links in the description to both of those things, as well as links to our Twitters and our Facebook group and all the things.
Please tweet at me about my opinions on fucking, difficulty as an art aesthetic. Oof. I would love that.
Please tweet at me about hamburgers. I like hamburgers. I think that's about it. Anything else you wanted to talk about?
No, I guess we've hit the nail on the head.
We've hit some nail on the head. Maybe not the nail that we were aiming at when we started the podcast.
That specific one.
But we have driven a nail into a board of wood somewhere. Until next time, dear listeners.
Farewell.